Today we're going to solve quadratic equations in 4 different ways. You guys really have to pay attention to the directions so that you know which method to use. The first set of directions say solve by the square root method. So we are going to have to isolate the squared term when we use the square root method. So the squared term is the x squared, so we're going to get it by itself by subtracting 11 from both sides. That gives us x squared equals 13, and we're going to take the square root of both sides. The only time you can use this method is when you do not have a b term. When you use this method, you have to remember to put plus or minus in your answer. So those are some key things to remember. The square root cancels out the squared, so you're just left with x. The square root of 13 you're going to do on your calculator, and you're going to get 3.61 if you round to the nearest hundredth. You will use your calculator for all of these problems. Photomath doesn't use the calculator, so make sure you guys are. The next set of directions say solve by factoring. So factoring is where you're going to look at the first term and you're going to look at the last term, and you're going to separate your problem into 2 parentheses. 6x squared splits up 2x and 3x. It could split up 6x and 1x, so I might have to redo this one. And 5 splits up 5 and 1. So again, this is a guess and test. I know my last term's negative, so my signs have to be different. And for my middle term, when I check my smiles, I need to get a positive 7x. So this gives me a 3x. This gives me a 10x. And if I take 10x minus 3x, that gives me a positive 7x in the middle. So I did pick the right ones the first time, but I need my 3 to be negative and my 10x to be positive. So you have to multiply to get negative 5 and add to get 7x. Once you figure out your factors, you're going to set each factor equal to 0. And then you're going to solve for x. So I would subtract 1 right here. Nope, I'm going to add 1 because I do the opposite. And that gives me 2x equals 1. And then I'm going to divide both sides by 2. And I get x equals 1/2 for one of my answers. And then on the other side, I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides, which gives me 3x equals negative 5. And then I divide by 3, so those cancel. And where am I going to squeeze this in? I get x equals negative 5 over 3. Remember, the key to these problems is making sure that you understand the directions so that you solve the problem how I'm asking you to solve. This next problem says solve by using the quadratic formula. In the quadratic formula, you have to identify a, which is the number in front of the x squared, b, which is the number in front of the x term, and c, which is the constant term. You also have to make sure you include the signs with all of those. Now you're going to take those values and you're going to plug them into the quadratic formula, and you get x equals the opposite of b, which is positive 2, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. So remember, we are going to do what's inside the square root first. And when you hit your square root button on your calculator, it automatically opens a parenthesis here. So you're going to have to put 2 parentheses because you want to type in what's underneath the square root exactly like you see it here. You should get, when you type this, what I'm highlighting now, into your calculator, you should get the square root of 88, which you're probably not going to see on your screen. You're going to see the decimal 9.38. So once you get to this point, you want to split it up into two problems. You have x equals 2 plus 9.38 divided by 6. And then you have x equals 2 minus 9.38 divided by 6. And you're going to go back to your calculator and you're going to type in the numerator first because you have to add those up before you can divide. So go ahead and do that now. When you add 2 plus 9.38, you get 11.38. When you divide that by 6, you get 1.90. I'm rounding to the second decimal place. Now on the next one, you are going to take 2 minus 9.38, which is negative 7.38, and divide that by 6, and you get negative 1.23. So remember, you're going to get a lot of decimal answers, and that's okay because you're going to use your calculator to give me the final answer. Last but not least, our directions say solve by graphing. So when we're graphing, we're going to look at where the graph crosses the x-axis. Now you got to pay attention to the numbers that are on the x-axis. So we want to give this answer right here, which is negative 1, 2, 3, 4. And we want to give this answer for x right here, which is positive 1, 2, 3. So all you have to do is look at where the graph crosses the x-axis and give me those answers. That's it for my notes today. On Canvas, I'll put some filled in notes that will have more examples for you to look at. But I'm going to leave you with this. You have to pay attention to the directions. You only want to solve by graphing when the directions tell you to and you're given a graph. You want to solve by square roots when you do not have a bx term. So there's an x squared term and there's a constant, but there's no bx. You want to factor when it's easy for you, or if the directions say solve by factoring. And last but not least, you can always use the quadratic formula if it's difficult for you to factor. If the directions say you have to use the quadratic formula to solve, then you need to make sure you do that. Email me with questions. See you guys.